Hey, got it. Hi, everybody. My name is Martin Freifeld. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Uh, I am so glad to be here, glad to be at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and glad to be sober today. It's a real blessing. More so today, I realized that than at the time I got sober. I was just angry and scared and really annoyed with what had happened to my life. But we'll get to that later. But before I begin, every meeting that I'm asked to share, I always like to start with a set-aside prayer, and I hope I can listen to it tonight. And if you haven't heard it, would you please join me? If you have heard it, dear God, please help me set aside anything I think I know about myself, about my disease, about the big book, the 12 steps, the program, the fellowship, the people in the fellowship, and all spiritual terms, especially you, God, so that I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me see the truth. Amen. Said, my name is Martin Freifeld. I am a recovered alcoholic, recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, and my sobriety date is October 7th, 2002. And I'd like to first of all, thank this group for inviting me. This group definitely has something I want. I mean, I can't believe the number of people here on this meetings into the Zoom era, so it must be doing something, absolutely something right. And I'd especially like to thank Stephen, number one, for coming to speak to the small group that I'm involved with, keeping going here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and secondly, for inviting me. Just a bit about that group. We have many groups up here, as all the towns do, and when the pandemic started, this group lost its meeting place. It had lost its main meeting place the year before, and there were a couple of old timers trying to keep it going. This group has been in continuous existence since 1948. Had been a speaker meeting. It had been one of the few in our area back then. And out of a sense of service and duty and compassion, and to help the senior members of the group who could no longer get around very much, my friend Joe and I decided to keep this going. And we've been doing that for ever since the pandemic started. And Stephen was one of our speakers. I got his name from someone, and an excellent speaker he was. And it turns out we have a little something in common, perhaps geographically. He went to a prep school up here in my neck of the woods, and he's quite familiar with the area. So again, thank you so much. So, wish I had an exciting story that was full of car chases, crashes, explosions, jail, institutions, as I've heard many stories, but that's not my story. And if I've learned anything over the years in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's that I have to tell my story. I used to want a different story, a more exciting one that was, adventuresome, because I thought that's what you wanted to hear. And what I understand today is you want to hear my story, and my story is unique, yet I have so much in common with all of the rest of you. A couple of important things. I grew up in what I thought was a non-alcoholic family, although I learned later over the years that my mother was probably something of a drug addict, taking a lot of pills. I grew up in the Jewish religion. Now, not so much the religion as the heritage. And if any of you are Jewish, you would know what I mean. There's many people who are ethnically Jews, but we don't practice. And that was to change later on. Actually, I grew up with a mother who was agnostic, and she instilled that into her children. I don't want to say drilled it in, but she made it very clear that there was no God. The people who believed in God were kind of foolish and uneducated, and really, if you were smart and you knew the score, that you didn't believe in God, in the sky. Religion's the opiate of the masses, as Karl Marx used to say. And I realized down the road, when I learned something about my history and my heritage, that my mother had grown up in a family who had come from Eastern Europe, from Lithuania. And not only her family, but it turns out the whole bunch of families in that place were against the czars, and they became communists because that was the alternative. I don't know if they're outright communists, but that was the general feeling, is anything that opposed the current regime. And many of those people felt the same way about God, getting some of those ideas from from the communists who had been very influential in that part of the world at that time, before the rise of the Russian Empire. And they, like many people, they fled around right after World War I, and they came to the United States, to New York. And both my parents grew up there, and they met in New York. But I only bring that up because it does play a part of my story as time goes on. So I did grow up in a very comfortable, I would like to think, middle class house without any problems, other than my father had deep depression. He was always he changed jobs several times. We had to move all over, and that was difficult for me because I was always a little skinny kid, and I felt if I couldn't beat them up, I could get them with my brains. Unfortunately, my brains weren't that good either. I was never a top student. I was always like an okay student. I wanted to do whatever it took to get by as well as I could. And I kept thinking, well, I'll wait till the last minute and then study hard and catch up. And that didn't seem to work a lot of the time. So I spent my years growing up with, I personally had no particular ambitions. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was frightened. As I said, I was always a small person, kind of skinny, completely unathletic, and always wanted to be, part of the in crowd. I knew I never possibly could be. I was just too nerdy, too goofy, and never was going to be the football hero, and was never going to get the cheerleader. I was just some skinny little kid who wasn't particularly. I thought I was pretty bright, but I wasn't the brightest. I just, there I was, average, not much of anything. And the funny thing is, my mother also said, I really don't care what you become in life. All I want you to do is to be happy. Whatever career you possibly want is fine with me. You could be a cardiologist, a gastroenterologist, an orthopedic surgeon, a brain surgeon. It doesn't matter. Any career in the world you possibly could want. So as you could tell, I was sort of directed to become a doctor, because that was her childhood dream growing up. She grew up in the 30s when doctors were highly respected, not like today. Today we respect the lawyers, but back then it was, they were really held up there in high esteem. And it was kind of, for a young Jewish boy, it was a great thing to do, become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a Wall Street executive, anything but a politician. That was out of the question. So I had my marching orders. I had my direction from my mother. And again, as I said, I had no particular idea what I wanted to do, although I did always have that secret desire to join the in crowd, to be part of them. And I just couldn't wait. I planned years before I actually had a drink. I planned to go out drinking. I couldn't wait to go out there and get loaded and just take my mind out of whatever was going on with me at the time. So my first drink, again, I wish I could say it was absolutely remarkable, an aha moment. It wasn't. That's my experience, and I can only tell you about my experience. So my first drink was what I finally got invited to go out with a bunch of kids for an evening. It was a bunch of really nerdy kids. They were not cool in the least, and they had a 6-pack of beer, and nothing much happened. I had one beer. We had to split it evenly. I didn't do more drinking till a lot later on. And as I said, my mother's ambition for me was to become a doctor. I had no better plans whatsoever, but unfortunately I kept, not making the mark for good grades. It was the time of the Vietnam War when I was growing up. I graduated high school in '64. And at that time, I was also introduced to music, and I'm a musician. I still am today. I was a very amateur musician, playing rock and roll bands. And that was always interfering with my studying. I would rather spend more time doing that than studying. And it kind of distracted me from getting those absolutely best grades. I like to tell myself that. I think I'm lying to myself, probably. Excuse me. Sorry. I think I was lying to myself, but I didn't get into the college that I wanted. I got into a good college in Rochester, New York, and I flunked out after the first semester. I got very, very sick, and I had anemia, and I had an enlarged spleen, and they didn't know what it was, but they finally figured out, well, it probably is an enzyme deficiency. And because of that enzyme deficiency, it turned out that I wasn't qualified for the draft to go to Vietnam, which is very helpful, because when I flunked out of college, you become eligible for the draft. And I went through some testing and they said, yeah, you must have this enzyme deficiency. And because I can't take the malaria pill, I can't go to Southeast Asia. And once again, there was the first evidence, if I look back, of God working in my life when I didn't think there was any God. Here's a kid that was brought up thinking there's just no God, nothing's going to happen. Things were just happening to me either by fate, by chance, or through my own hard work, which is pretty crazy when I think about it. Excuse me a minute. So I flunked out. I hung around with the band for a while, and I got into my local hometown college, which I finished up. At the time, it wasn't such a great place, but today it's apparently hard to get into. I can never get in there today. And I finished up and went on to pursue my mother's dream of becoming a doctor. And so I couldn't get into a medical school again because of by this time I had started drinking somewhat. And in the 60s, when you play in a rock and roll band, you drink and you smoke pot back then. I hate that today, but that's what I did. Or take anything that came my way. I would do that, but I would try it. If I didn't like it, I would never use it again. So I didn't really like any of the other stuff. It was mostly just drinking that I liked. So I played in bands, didn't get in. My plan was to get into Hershey Medical School as a graduate student and in an allied profession, and then kind of sideways sneak into the medical school, do real well the first year. I was determined. So after the first year, I did very poorly, and they wanted to kick me out. But I had a great time there. I mean, it was a 6-story building. I had a girlfriend on every floor. I played in a rock and roll band. I would go out drinking most weeknights. I just had a great time, but didn't do very well academically. And so here I was now getting kicked out of this school. And once again, my mother did the research. I wish I could say I thought of this brilliant idea. I didn't, but this is my mother taking care of me. Said, well, you can go to medical school overseas. He said, I've looked into some options and, you can go to Belgium or France. And I ended up in Paris because my advisors at the Hershey Medical Center had a connection there. So when I went there, this is great. I may flunk out of this school too, but what the heck, I'm going to have a great time living in Paris. I was 25 years old, single. What could be better? So I embarked on a career of medical school in France, and it's a 7-year program there, by the way. So when I got there, of course, France is a wonderful place for an alcoholic. I mean, we had, lunch at the cafeteria, you have wine served every single day with every meal. And if you don't want to get buzzed in the afternoon, they say, please just drink the beer, because beer is almost nothing. There's almost no alcohol beer. And that was the attitude of the French. So I had a great time there. And I figured even if I didn't learn anything about medical school, I'd learn the wines. I always wanted to be a wine connoisseur and know all the dates and the vintages and the different labels and what to drink with what, how to pair things. And that was my dream. That didn't happen either. It turns out French, for the most part, the average Frenchman just wants to, a nice recent wine to drink with their meal. And that was it. I was a little disappointed in that. So I was there going through school and somehow managing to get by at the skin of my teeth. And we went on a vacation trip to England for a bunch of us went over just for fun to see some other students. And when I was there, I had what's called a bone crisis, severe, terrible pain. I was rolling around on the floor. I was only 27 years old and I didn't know what it was. Nothing would make me better. And finally, one of the people said, well, why don't we go down to the local Boots drugstore and get some aspirin with codeine? And I said, well, that's great, but how can you do that? There's no doctor around. You can't get a prescription. They said, oh, don't you worry. It's over the counter in England. We'll just get some. We'll just pick it up. And so they did. And when I took that, believe me, I had an instant awakening. So now I'm starting with a second problem. I not only have alcohol, but I have some outside issues that are really, taking a hold of me. But I still had my mother's goal in mind. I still had to finish. And I wasn't going to be happy, I told myself, until I'm board certified in a subspecialty of medicine. So I soldiered on, continued with school, managed to get through school and graduated, came back to the United States and tried to do an internship and a residency, did poorly in the first internship, had to do a second internship. I mean, my life is one series of failures, one after the other, the way I look at it. What I didn't realize is God is looking after me this whole life. Things are really getting better. So the problem was I got back to the US and I finished my residency, and finally, I got into a practice. And I became a gynecologist. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. And I got into this the practice with another guy who was a raging alcoholic. We used to have our office meetings at 11 o'clock at night at Monty's bar. And that's, and we would meet till very late, and he would, I was the junior partner, and he would say, well, let's meet at 11. And I finally, at 2 or 3 in the morning, I say, I got to go home. And he said, yeah, tomorrow I was supposed to be on call, but I'm not going to be, because I'm really feeling hungover. So you take call. And he was dumping on me. I was taking call all the time, but I was the younger partner. Well, after a couple of years, we separated. I have this problem of getting along with other people, which I see today as part of one of my personality defects, as part of the self-centeredness that's involved with Alcoholics Anonymous. And I ended up starting my own practice. We split semi-amicably. I was able to stay in that town, and lo and behold, I ended up having a fantastic, very successful practice. I've learned that the practice of medicine, I don't know about law, but in medicine, a lot of it is what you think of the doctor as a personality, not particularly how skilled that doctor is, but do you get along with them? Do you feel comfortable with them? Are they a nice doctor? And if you really look at who your friends recommend as a great doctor, it's their personality they recommend, and not particularly their clinical skills. So I had perhaps average clinical skills, I like to think, maybe less, but I had a personality that may not have been suited to be a great bon vivant or a great social person or a great speaker, but it was suited to be one-on-one with women, which I had always been fascinated with all my life. So I thought it was a privilege and an honor to serve as a gynecologist, to deliver babies and to take care of female problems. And I would love to say I had a long career of that, but I didn't, because what happened was that once I finally made it, I got board certified in obstetrics. That was my goal. I could really let loose then and start drinking and taking drugs. Now, you can't be smelling and reeking of alcohol during the daytime. So I found out that if you take medication that alters your mind also and takes away that feeling of discomfort and unease, that works just as well, plus they can't smell it on you. And like most people, I like to think people can't tell when I'm impaired, but I hate to say it, that I worked impaired, I delivered babies impaired, I operated impaired, and it was not a very pretty sight. And as I said, I had left this guy's practice. I was in a solo practice because I operate best alone. If you guys just leave me alone, nobody has any kind of way to keep tabs on me, to watch me. I'm not beholden to anyone. And more importantly, I'm not responsible to anyone that way either. I just want to do my own thing. And I did that for the longest time. However, I started getting into trouble right away. I had various things happen in the practice, some surgical misadventures, and the hospital administrators, whoever was in charge, finally were realizing, there's something wrong with this guy. We're not quite sure. They never caught me outright drinking or taking drugs, but what they did find was this guy who was just not acting right, just behaving kind of strangely and not following the rules. That was the biggest thing that they got me on. If anybody here can identify with a person who just doesn't like the rules and doesn't want to follow the rules, well, that was me. That was definitely me. And I have to say, part of it, I'm not placing blame, but part of it was because of this partner I had joined for 3 years, who was a real maverick, and he didn't like to follow the rules either. The difference between us was he was a very, very talented surgeon, a great thinker. He had a great mind, and I'm just a follower. But he ended up inventing many procedures that are still used today in obstetrics and gynecology, gynecologic surgery. He was a fantastic surgeon. And I was suffering from the delusion that just because we were partners, that I was just as good a surgeon as he was, and I was not. And that got me into a lot of trouble. So I managed to kind of soldier along, and things started getting really dicey, and I ended up with some very big lawsuits. And I wanted them to try. I thought I was going to be covered and hide my assets. So what I did was I ended up investing in a place down in the Caribbean, as thinking that, I'll set up a trust fund and nobody will ever know about it in case the big lawsuit hits me. And sure enough, it did. Unfortunately, let's see, we have to mute Wendy there. Sure enough, the lawsuit did catch up with me. And I was glad I had gotten that place years ago. That was back in the late 90s, 98. So by 2002, my world came crashing down on me. They finally caught up and said, there's something wrong with this guy. We're going to kick him off the staff. And, by that time, I had been drinking for years and years, drinking every night, taking drugs in the daytime, drinking every night, drinking on weekends. I was still playing in rock bands. The leader used to say, Martin, would you please not drink so much tonight? Because, you may think you're playing bass better, but you're not at all. You're really messing everything up. You have the wrong tempo, the wrong everything. And I would drive by. I wanted to stop. I wanted to stop so many times. I really did. I knew I was in trouble. I knew I was in deep, deep trouble. I knew I was an impaired physician, but I wasn't going to tell anybody because I might lose my career. You don't want to do that. I mean, that may happen. So what I did was think about it. I thought about it and I tell myself, you're probably an alcoholic and an addict, but if you can stop for 30 days, you're not an alcoholic. Now, where did that come from? I mean, really, I just made that up. I just made that up in my sick alcoholic mind that if I could stop for 30 days, that would somehow prove to, I don't know who, that I wasn't an alcoholic. So what I did was make a decision, and then I took some action and tried to stop for 30 days. Well, the first day or two I could do it, was getting by, but day after day, it just got worse and worse. And my mind was racing and I was going into withdrawal and I felt terrible. And I love to tell you, I made it to 30, but what I did is I did make it to about 25 days when I finally said, 25 is almost 30. It's close enough. So, yep, you just about made it to 30 days. So that's it. You can go ahead and have a drink. And the minute that touched my lips, I said, you've just been lying to yourself. You're screwed. So did I immediately go out and get help? Well, of course not. I'm not going to do that. That would mean telling somebody. That would mean actually admitting that there is something wrong. And then the world would know. And then I would lose my career and my wonderful practice. So I tried to just soldier along on my own. And I can never forget this image I've always had. Every day when I would drive to work, I would go past the outpatient building for a local rehab. And I kept thinking, should I go there? No, absolutely not. And then I kept thinking, well, those poor people who have to go there, they're just not having fun anymore. They're just not drinking and they're not taking drugs and they're really in bad shape. And I kept thinking, but something about that place that always drew me. Well, finally the end came crashing down in the spring of 2002. By that time, I knew the end was near and I was trying to make a geographic. So I did a 2-week stint of working in the hospital in the Cayman Islands where I have my second home, and things were going okay there, I thought, and I was going to be offered a position. But then again, the internet had just become, by 2002, was up and running. And one of the other doctors on the staff who felt he was competing with me decided to do a Google search of me, and he saw, Dr. Freifeld, suspended from hospital staff. So he went and ran to the administrator, said, you don't want this guy, get rid of him. So I was ignominiously kicked out of that place. And that was going to be my, out. That was going to be my career change when they finally got rid of me at the hospital. And within a few days, I got the phone call from the hospital saying, we don't want you to come back. That's it. You've been breaking too many rules. And I wanted to fight it. They were petty rules, but basically, like any big institution, if you want to get rid of an employee, you go to the rule book and you find these rules, which technically I violated. So I did violate them, but I had a good reason for it because I was thinking independently and doing things my own way. So that didn't work, and there I am. I still had some money saved up. As I said, I had a successful practice, but I had no place to go and nothing to do. And the problem is my family, who suffered. Just a minute. As my kids were growing up, I have 2 wonderful boys. I'll never forget the scene when they were younger and I was in the midst of my deepest addiction. I would come home and they'd come running up and jumping in my arms, my 2 beautiful sons, and they would, Daddy, we'll love to see you. And all I could think was, what a fraud I am. If they only knew what a horrible person their father is deep inside, that he's an alcoholic, that he's an addict, that he's not the person you think he is. He's not this loving father who you think he is. It was just tearing me apart. But as I said, I did not know what to do about it. I had no idea what to do about it. I didn't know anything about help. Oh, sure, I've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everybody has. I had no idea what it was. I have no idea whatsoever what it was and what it did. So there I am, finally, once and for all, kicked off the medical staff, and without recourse, by the way. I was suspended, but there was no procedure to get unsuspended. So I was stuck because I was in a specialty where you need to be on a hospital staff to do anything at all. So I just stopped working and laid around my home. I would love to say that, okay, that's a wake-up call. Why don't you go to rehab and get help? No, I didn't do that either. What I did was just kind of hung around the house and moped. And here's where I really am convinced that God intervened in my life. So one of the other doctors who I had known, and I wasn't particularly good friends with him, so I had delivered his children. He stopped by my house one day out of the clear blue, right when I was, 3 or 4 months into this doing nothing. And he said, why don't you declare disability for depression? I said, oh, could I do that? Well, yeah, I'm depressed. Yeah, why not? I'll do it. So I started to go see a psychiatrist to, work on this depression thing so I could get disability and have some income at least, because I had a great disability policy. And I started seeing the psychiatrist. I wasn't telling the truth, like most of us see a psychiatrist. And sure enough, what happened was one day, and again, need to backtrack on my story. I told you about this enzyme deficiency that kept me out of going to Vietnam. It turned out it really was something else. It was a different disease. They had misdiagnosed it. In retrospect, I could have gone to Vietnam, but I didn't. Once again, God working in my life. What it was, though, is a genetic enzyme deficiency that is very common in Ashkenazi Jews. So here's my Jewish heritage once again poking into my life. I have this heritage of being the Ashkenazi Jew from Lithuania, Latvia, Eastern Europe, not believing in God. Then I have this heritage of having this enzyme deficiency that's not particularly life-threatening, but it needed enzyme replacement. And that had been invented, ironically enough, by my medical school roommate. He was one of the 5 people on the original team that invented this replacement. And I would have to get an IV every 2 weeks. And one time when I was getting this IV, I was feeling really despondent and despaired. And I thought to myself, well, if I stick a little vial of something in this IV that's already going in my arm, it wouldn't be like being a drug addict. So I put it in because I was just, I had no place to go, nothing to do. And I was just drinking and using more and more and more and more. And what happened is I passed out. My wife couldn't revive me, and she called the ambulance and called a friend of mine. And that's when I got sent to rehab, because she called up the psychiatrist that was taking care of me. And he said, if you don't go immediately to the emergency room and then to a detox, I'm not going to work on your disability. So that was the carrot, and that was the carrot that it took from me rather than the stick. Fearful of losing something that I didn't have, actually, because I'd already lost my career, but I didn't want to lose that medical license. So I agreed. And that was my initial contact with the treatment. Let's say the treatment environment was not with AA. So I went there, and of course they let me go for the weekend and said, report to rehab on Monday. Of course, I relapsed over that weekend. I wasn't about to do anything anyone said. And that's when my career with you started. And thank God my life ended up that way, because there's so many different ways it could end up. It didn't have to end up that way. I could have said, screw it, screw everybody. I'm going here, I'm going there. But because of enough fear and enough wanting something, fear of losing something I was at least willing to consider rehab. And deep down, I knew I needed to get better. I had known that for years. Let's not lie to ourselves. I had known that for years and years, more than a decade, that there was really something wrong with me and I really needed to get better. So here in 2002, on October 7th, I entered a place called Marworth, which is a rehab up here in Pennsylvania, in a healthcare program. Some were sicker than others. We had to go for 90 days, which I was looking forward to because I had a detox from, both alcohol and drugs. And I was able to do that. And also, I just wanted to stick with it. I was determined to stick with it. I was determined in the back of my mind to get that medical license back. And the whole time I was in rehab, I was plotting the day that the 5 years would be over, because I had to be monitored for 5 years if I wanted to even have a prayer of keeping a medical license. That I was praying that 5 years would be over, so that I could use again. That's my thought upon entering. The other thing they talked about was God, and not so much. I didn't hear much at all about what was about the 12-step program. Fortunately, it was a 12-step based rehab, but I did hear you had to do the steps, and I looked at them on the wall, and it didn't make much sense to me. But I was determined to try to follow them. And I do have to say that I had a moment that I don't like to talk. I didn't talk about much before. I don't usually, because, as I said, I'm Jewish, but I decided to go to a service, a Catholic service, because there was a priest who everybody said was great. And I was sitting there early on, and he started talking about the gospel, and he started talking about Jesus. And even though I'm Jewish, I just felt this wave pass through me. I felt this warm, warm wave, and it was as if God was passing through me, and it was amazing. It was really amazing. But again, I kept trying to deny it, because I said, well, this can't be happening to me. I'm Jewish. This doesn't happen when you're Jewish. Jesus, of course, he's a Jewish philosopher, but this is another religion. I kept rejecting the old ideas. And that's why I love to read the set-aside prayer, because I have so many old ideas that I need to get rid of. So, I got out of rehab. I said, go to meetings, and I had to get cards signed for 5 years, and I had to pee in a cup for 5 years. I had to be monitored. I was willing to do it. And I thought, maybe I actually will get better. Maybe I'll actually like this stuff. And I have to say that my perception, and this is my memory and perception of what the groups were like when I first got out in the winter of 2002, that I got out that Christmas. My band had a job New Year's Eve, and of course they said, well, you better not go in the band. There's a risk of relapsing. I kept saying, no, I won't, but I had to follow rules. So I followed directions. I didn't play New Year's Eve. You hate to miss that when you're a musician. It's the one night a year every musician plays. And I ended up going to meetings. And I have to say, I fell in love with the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I just loved going to meetings. I had nothing else to do. I'm the kind of person that likes to always have something to do. So I started going to lots and lots and lots of meetings. And I wish I had the story where some guy who really knew the 12 steps in the big book walked up to me and took me aside and said, we're going to go through the steps and you're going to have a spiritual awakening. That was not my experience. That did not happen. What happened to me was I went to a lot of meetings. They were all discussion meetings in my area. Almost every one that I went to is just a discussion meeting. What are you going to talk about today? What's your problem? How are you feeling? And then they would talk about how someone's feeling, and then we'd offer feedback, which is advice to a person, which is actually crosstalk. It had nothing to do with the 12-step program of recovery. And I really thought, I want to tell you people, I actually thought from my first experiences with most of my local meetings that sobriety was something that you got from going to a whole bunch of meetings, call 3 alcoholics a day, just don't drink one day at a time. And then if you've done that for about 5 years and then you got really sober, then as extracurricular advanced work, you did the 12 steps. That's what I thought. Really, that was the impression I got. Nobody said that to me, but that was the impression that I was getting. I had no idea that our program of recovery is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I finally did come to understand that and realize that after about the second or third year, some of us are slower than others, and it just did not come to me. I did not realize that. I had a first sponsor who was someone, and we have something called the caduceus, which is other doctors, because I felt I had to associate with other doctors. I don't do that today, but I thought I did. I associate with you guys today. That's who I associate. You are my people. But I associated with this guy, and we sat and read the 12 and 12 over 12 weeks, 1 chapter a week. We didn't do any of the work. We just read the chapter. We read the chapter, and that was it. And he said, okay, we went through the steps. Good enough for me. If you don't know any better, how are you going to argue with them or hear otherwise? I mean, that's one of the things I absolutely just love about the Zoom era. First of all, I love technology. I love Zoom. I'm so comfortable with it. I'll get to that later, how I work today with Zoom. but you get to find your own people. And I can tell you one thing: to see 164 people on this meeting with you people, you've got to have something really good going on. This has got to be a great meeting, and it's got to be based on the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps, which is what I've come to understand is what I need to recover. It's how I recover. So one of the turning points for me was listening to speaker tapes, which is in a way, remote meetings. And particularly, I listened to someone called Sandy Beach. I heard some recordings of this guy named Sandy Beach, who said something that really struck me. He said, when people talk about the spiritual part of the program, he said, there is no spiritual part of the program. The entire program is spiritual. That's the whole point. I mean, read the steps. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And see, that was another kicker for me. For many years, I was hanging around thinking, well, I'm screwed. First of all, I'm Jewish. Most of these people are Christian. They talk about God. God's got to be a Christian God sitting up on a cloud in the sky on a throne with a big staff. And, old ideas, buddy, old ideas. It's not going to work. I've come to have a God of my understanding today that's just everything that I want. I was told, pick a God that you want, pick the attributes that you want. That's fine. That is God. That is God for you. So what I did is, after listening to Sandy Beach and discovering that they have these things called conferences or conventions, and that the speaker meetings aren't like the ones that were in my area, where basically people were trained to tell a very, very entertaining drunkalogue about the car wrecks and the jails and the divorces, none of which happened to me. They tell those for 45 minutes, and in the 5 minutes it said, and then I came to AA, and then everything is better. Thank you, good night. And to me, that was a speaker meeting. I thought that's what it was all about. Today, my personal preference, and it's not necessary, is to tell how it used to be, what happened to me and what it's like today. So this is what happened to me. That's the transformation. And what I did was start looking for a person who could sponsor me and take me for the actual 12 steps of the Big Book. And I wish I could say I did it quickly. I did not. I did it slowly. It was haphazardly. I've done it many times, to the point where I finally have a sponsor today who is taking me through the steps yet again, because the steps are not something that are a checklist. I used to think they were. I said, well, one of these days I'll do them, check them off, all 12. We'll be done. I'll be good to go. I used to think, when I was in rehab, I used to think, let me sober up, straighten me out, and then leave me alone, and I'll be fine. I'll be just fine. I'll be okay. And that wasn't the case at all. One of the stories that stuck with me the most out of that 90 days I spent in rehab was one night we had some outside fellows come in, and there were these three gentlemen that came in from about 2 hours away from past Bingham to New York. And I had the fortune, God put me in a small group with this guy who the two other guys had brought him because he was suffering. He had 12 years sobriety, and he was having problems. He was having a lot of problems. His business was falling apart. He was in debt. His wife was going to leave him. And he was here tonight, at that rehab, telling his story. And after he told the story, all I could think of was, man, why in the world, when all these horrible things are happening in your life, are you spending an evening driving 2 hours to a rehab and driving 2 hours back and talking with these people who are sitting in the rehab chairs? Why aren't you at home fixing things? Why aren't you fixing things? And little did I realize, that was one of the biggest lessons I ever had in that rehab. Little did I realize that when all else fails, working with another alcoholic is what helps keep us sober. I had no idea, and that lesson came home to me so strongly. It wasn't until a couple of years afterwards when I realized, oh my God, that's why his friends brought him to that rehab. Just because his life was falling apart, because all else was failing. When all else fails, they need to work with another alcoholic. So, for almost 18 years, I did not work as a doctor. I did a little volunteer work. I tried to start my practice again. But it was important to me because my ego and my life had been wrapped up with that, even though I was trying to suppress it. And I remember the other thing, when I first sat in that rehab that first day, the administrator said to me, we think you have alcoholism. I said, yeah, no kidding. And not only that, we can help you. And not only that, we can help make you a better person. And I reeled back. How do you know that I think I'm a horrible person, that I'm a terrible person? I don't think anything of myself. I have low self-esteem. How did you know that? I know today knows it because we all do when we get here. We think we're horrible people. We've screwed up our lives. We've screwed up other people's lives. We don't realize it. We're thinking mostly of ourselves, our own lives. But I was able to hear that and realize it, and that gave me hope. And that's the most important thing that I get from everybody at an AA meeting. And if I can do anything at a meeting, I like to try to give people hope that it does work and that it does get better. So I continued with going to meetings. I've always been a meeting maker. I absolutely love meetings. And that first year I went to at least minimum 2 meetings a day, sometimes 3. And I did that for a couple of years. I did eventually start working the program, and it took me a long time. It was actually listening to Sandy Beach that got me started, and listening to Joe and Charlie that really got me into the understanding of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They explained it in a way that I can understand and that really made sense. And then I learned that the answers are all in that blue book with the black print on the white pages. The answers are all there. And every time I read that book and do an in-depth big book study, I'm just amazed. A shiver goes through me. How could Bill have written this with just 3 or 4 years of sobriety? I mean, it's just mind-boggling with people with multiple decades of sobriety are still studying every single word he wrote in that book because it all makes so much sense. On page 62, selfishness and self-centeredness being the root of all our problems, but we just don't usually think so. You know, we step on the toes of others. We're tornadoes through their lives. We just don't think so. And that's what amazed me. And that's what, I am trying to move toward that spiritual ideal day by day. And I could see the longer I do this, the more I could see what a lifetime process that this has become. And I have to tell you, I don't do it very well. I do it very poorly. I think personally, I'm inching toward getting better, the old 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but slowly inching toward being a better human being and being a better spiritual person. And I have to tell you that I've always had a struggle with God. As I said, if you're brought up from a background and you're always influenced by your parents that there is no God and that God doesn't exist and people believe in God are weak fools, it's pretty tough to do the 180 and turn around and say, wait a minute, my entire life today depends upon my relationship with God. I need to have a relationship with God. Please help me find that relationship. And what my personal experience, what I found is that not only does prayer help, which I thought I didn't believe in prayer, meditation has helped me immensely. And especially over the last year, I've joined a daily men's group at 7 a.m. that meets based in Minnesota. And they brought meditation in my life. And instead of just telling you that I think you should do meditation, I actually started doing it myself. And I can tell you my experience just doing a 10-minute meditation every day. I would no longer do without it as I would do without food, water, or air, as it says in the big book. I have come to rely on it. And the magic of it is I'm not meditating on anything. I'm just doing a breathing meditation. That's all I'm doing is breathing in, breathing out, just seeing how my thoughts go all over the place. Whenever my thoughts wander, I center them back to my breath, breathing in and breathing out. I try to think about God sometimes I don't. Sometimes I try not to think about what's going to happen today or what did I do in the past. That's not good. But I can tell you that my personal experience has been meditation has helped me immensely. Because it turns out that's the answer AA has for everything. Prayer and meditation is absolutely the answer. When we go through our steps, we go through our inventory, how do we get rid of those character defects? Prayer. We ask, because we can't do it ourselves. It says very clearly that we alone cannot wish them away any more than we can wish away our alcoholism. God has to do that. So I had to go back again and again and do a very, very thorough second step and third step. The second step says, came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It doesn't say the Christian God will restore you to sanity. I'm sorry, it does not say that. And my mind was stuck on that for so many years. It just says you have to come to believe that there's something outside yourself, that another power, Martin. Come on, you dummy. That's what it's got to be, and that's what it is. And when I look at it that way, I don't fight it. I have no problem with that whatsoever. It's not telling me who God is or what God is or what a higher power is. It's just telling me I need to have this higher power. And if I have that higher power and then make a decision to turn my will and my life over, then things are great. Problem is, I can make that decision all I want. The actual action is very difficult sometimes, and I always take my will back. I'm not going to say I mostly do. I always take my will back. And that's why it's a constant work. You know, my sponsor, Jack, says you need to do regular things regularly. And what he means by that is do all the things that AA tells us to do, is to attend meetings, to pray, to have a sponsor, to meditate. When I'm wrong, promptly admit it. Do a 10th step every day. Do the 11th step at night and upon awakening. If I do those regular things regularly, I have a half a shot of actually getting better. It really should help me a lot. And I do find that it helps. It helps quite a bit. So, you know, I want to end up with whatever happened to Martin's medical career, because I spent 18 years of telling myself it wasn't important, and, you know, I lost everything. Now, I have to say, fortunately, I did manage to keep my my medical license. It was just kind of in a bottom drawer for 3 years, but it was never suspended. It was never taken away. And thanks to some excellent lawyers who are actually in the program near our state capitol, I was able to get that license back, have it fully restored. And I wanted to do something. So I volunteered to be on the statewide committee for impaired physicians, the advisory committee for the state medical board. I wanted to do something, you know. I wanted to stay involved, even though I had been mourning my loss of my career in medicine. And while I was on that committee, it's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is the center of the state. I met a guy from a place called Williamsport, where the Little League World Championships are always held, which is about 2 hours from my house. And he said, you know, I have a Suboxone clinic, and we could always use doctors like you. Why don't you do it? So I looked into it and said, they give Suboxone for addicts instead of their heroin or whatever pill they're addicted to. I said, oh no, I can't do that. I'm Mr. AA, spiritual awakening. This is the only way. Once again, an old idea that I was stuck with, because I asked myself, finally, I realized after 2 years when he approached me again, we're here to help everyone. We love everyone. Everyone is welcome. What happens to the people who come to AA or to NA, if any of you know about that, and they don't make it and they don't stay? Do we call them up every week, or say, well, you know, we tried, we gave them our best, they're gone, we can't help them, too bad? Well, guess what, folks? That's about 95% of the people who really need it, who come in. And what are they doing out there? They're just being abandoned. Nothing is happening to them. They're not getting help. And I've realized what this Suboxone problem does, it at least gives the people who are heroin addicts or opioid addicts a fighting chance. Now, please understand, this has nothing to do with my life in Alcoholics Anonymous or my life as a sober alcoholic. This has to do with another medical field, which is closely related, treating addiction. And guess what? I decided to start doing that. But since it was so far from my house, I can only do it 1 or 2 days a month. And that was in late 2019. I started doing that. I started driving once a month, and he earned a couple bucks. He had me come in. I was doing it into 2020. And as you know, at the beginning of 2020, that's when COVID hit. And all of a sudden, the world turned upside down. The world changed. We started calling the patients. And at the same time, this man sold his practice. And I can tell you today, I inherited all his patients. I see over 400 patients a month on Zoom every day of the week. Well, 3 days a week intensely, and the other 2 days sporadically. I see patients every single day, and I'm helping them. I'm being of service. This is not AA. It's not 12-step, although any chance I can get, I work that in with them. I get that in, because that is my life today, being of service to God's children in any way I can. It doesn't say I carry the message when I can, and if I can't, I help other people. And today, again, I feel fulfilled. I get to work in my chosen profession. It's not the subspecialty that I wanted, but I get to work in my chosen profession with people who are suffering for the disease of addiction. And I get to help them to some way or other. And it's a wonderful, wonderful experience, because I get to speak with 400 different people every month, get to talk to them, see how their lives are going, see what they're doing. I talk to them about going to meetings. I say, look, if you ever want to stop, it's best to have a spiritual life to keep from relapsing again. But if that doesn't work, fine. So if I never thought God was working in my life, look at me today. I am so blessed. I am so blessed to have lived the life I did. And especially working with these people makes me realize how even more blessed I was to have Alcoholics Anonymous find me, because I don't want to say I found Alcoholics Anonymous. I say AA found me through a series of mistakes, misunderstandings, through a series of my career being shot, my life being shot, because those last few months when I was kicked out of the profession and had to sit around myself, I thought I'd drink myself and drug myself to death. I really did. That was my plan. I had no better plan. But thanks to you, thanks to a loving God, which has manifested himself in my life so many ways and so many times, I'm able to be a sober man today, a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, a loving husband to my wife, who, by the way, is 19 years sober, and a father to my children and grandchildren. I am so blessed. So I want to thank you people so much for inviting me to be with tonight. It's just such a blessing. And I got to tell you, I am madly in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.